Okay. Hello, my name is Juan Sandoval, and I will be exploring how education can be a powerful pathway to mitigation if implemented successfully. Climate change poses a growing challenge to society and our ecosystems with serious health, economic, and environmental repercussions. And at the same time, environmental literacy is lacking in students worldwide. So there's a pressing need and to take considerable measures to educate all students on global climate change. Um, Students must be taught to make lifestyle changes to mitigate their impact, which requires effective teaching strategies so that students can really follow through with these changes. And there's a significant technical success in studying climate change, which offers an amazing opportunity to develop technical skills like critical thinking, problem solving, and interdisciplinary connections. And the next generation science standards, which are being implemented nationwide, also correspond with these abilities that are gained when learning about the topic. So this is a call to action for our curriculum with this relevant skill set. And the positive environmental changes in student behavior when learning about climate change are notable. So if implemented on a wide scale, this type of educational approach could be effective, comparable to solar energy and reducing CO2 emissions. And the fact of the matter is, though, that current research often lacks a comprehensive synthesis of approaches and focuses on particular and very isolated strategies. So it was important to compile information on all current strategies and provide a comprehensive list of recommendations for this review. And in this study, three main educational strategies were identified, being engagement through personal relevance and through empowerment, a multidisciplinary and a system-based approach, and also powerful communicators proved to be influential in students' perspectives on climate change. And a systematic literature review was performed, which allowed for a comprehensive analysis of data and evidence from multiple perspectives. Keywords were used to narrow the search, and the documents I took into account were all in English. And I used Google Scholar as my database, which gave back about 470 results, and 82 of papers were screened from that. And from those screened, 56 were excluded due to irrelevance. So a lot of them focused on broader environmental education or didn't really focus on school curricula. Published data and language, any other than English, were also exclusion criteria. And at the end, 26 full text articles were assessed for eligibility and 22 were chosen and included in this review. So now let's move on to exploring the effective strategies. First off, global climate change, GCC, should be introduced through engaging means with empowering and action-based learning. So students must be informed that their actions have consequences, true consequences, and that GCC is not a far stray or irrelevant topic. Students will feel especially connected to the crisis if they see its effects on their local community. So if possible, maybe community projects are a highly effective means to achieve this. Talking with others in their own communities offers a unique opportunity to see different perspectives and impact that may have never crossed a student's minds. And constructive hope is another powerful method to inspire actions in scholars. So facts alone may induce helplessness, but on the other hand, hope paints a pathway to real change and may counter existing cynicism with really possible solutions. And historical perspectives, trust in collective action, or other technological solutions can offer optimism about the crisis. So solution-based learning and experiments, trials, and community projects will allow for the transforming of knowledge into progress, helping students understand complex topics. And thinking about creative solutions makes them active citizens rather than pessimists. And since pedagogy is a primary driver of long-term change, classroom activities must allow students to reflect and to react. So case studies, carbon footprint calculators, and community projects have proven to offer these opportunities. And It may be hard to induce connection for students in areas that aren't really affected by the climate crisis directly, and this is a double-edged sword, as developed nations are the largest contributors to carbon emissions, but they're at the end the least affected by the consequences. One way, though, that this connection may be possible is through video chat technologies, with students learning about personal stories from people that are affected by the issue around the world. And rhetorical strategies are also great ways to convey the importance of climate change. So films, movies, and other forms of imagery tend to be impactful in what students think about GCC. So for instance, a 2020 case study in a Washington middle school pilot curriculum used a collection of climate change centered books, which resulted in significant student engagement. And vivid imagery allowed students to visualize real world experiences and encourage action. Um, Young people also lack critical scientific knowledge relating to climate change, and many find other issues such as economic development a bigger priority. So evidence may not be enough to convince students of the importance of climate change. So it should be presented from a public health or any other win perspective. So co-benefits like aforementioned improvements to public health may help communicate the issue effectively, and as we gain something from it. So educators must hammer down the multifaceted nature of the crisis. And exploring the humanities when learning about this is also leads to connection in students, which allows them to explore implications from many different perspectives. And another case study, a master's program in the University of the Sunshine Coast in Australia, took this approach and found had an awareness and a better overall understanding of approaches to challenges. The climate crisis also strongly relates to inequity due to the heightened negative impacts in low-income communities and in less developed nations. So framing climate change as a social justice issue, given it disproportionate affects marginalized communities, will result in feelings of responsibility and will inspire students to act on climate change. And lastly, climate change is not based on linear relationships, but rather on many interactions. So educators must emphasize these relationships, the dynamic relationships that happen between systems in nature that are affected by climate change, and encourage an understanding of them between the causes and the consequences. And another important aspect of climate change education is who communicates this important information. Teachers and other students have been identified as primary sources of this information. So let's explore them in more depth. Teachers have a significant impact on students' perspectives, on inspiring future action. So they ought to serve as a source for hope. So constructively teaching facts and taking a clear stance on climate change. Some teachers, though, face some barriers due to pressure to address what's often called both sides, or the controversial nature of global climate change. And they also note insufficient knowledge on the topic as an obstacle to teaching this. So professional development may be a solution, and educate teachers on strategies and the necessary information for teaching this topic. Teachers may also talk about different approaches or solutions to the crisis with students to inspire debating, but be clear in that there's scientific consensus and data on changing temperatures. Misconceptions surrounding climate change are really ubiquitous among students, and they must be urgently addressed. Some of them are not finding a relationship between household energy consumption and emissions, or even confusing air pollution with greenhouse gases, or also confusing GCC with ozone depletion. And these ought to be addressed by communicators directly so that students may form relevant connections and accurate understanding of climate change. Lastly, peer-to-peer communication will serve as a source of relevant information for students. So young people are influential role models to each other, and discussion among them with activities like Model UN, simulations where students represent the delegation and discuss policy matters to develop solutions, may influence comprehension of the topic and inspire action. And these now together are all the strategies discussed, kind of summarized. And it's important to envision the big picture and how they intertwine with each other. Some of the most important findings are that scientific information must be reinforced with activities that really engage students to connect topics and solutions and systems. Also, community-based learning and empowerment are essential in empathizing with others and driving change. This model must be disciplinary and solution-based, encouraging students to generate solutions to environmental issues. And lastly, teachers are essential communicators and sources of inspiration. Communication among peers and teachers leads to a constant exchange of ideas and promotes change culture, which ultimately is a primary goal in education. Last things are some limitations of the strategies explored. Previously, lying communicating an abstract concept to students who are not noticeably affected by climate change. Video chat technologies may prove to be successful in breaking down this barrier. There's also a growing culture of climate deniers, but acknowledging these perspectives and really facing them is difficult but required in effective interventions. And lastly, many teachers cite their lack of time in their year as an impediment to teaching climate change, but advances such as the next generation science standards will hopefully reduce those barriers and constraints. And what comes next? Climate change education requires research in less developed countries, as the leading studies come from nations like the US, Australia, Canada, and the UK. So different approaches and responses to educational models may arise in other countries, offering potential significant insight. And although research into educational interventions primarily focuses on secondary school settings, there are multiple studies used in this review that were implemented in academic institutions across various school levels, from really elementary to graduate education, which may not translate universally and to a full extent. And further investigation on the secondary setting will be a benefit. So final thought, the urgency and effectiveness of climate change education is evident. So adopting some of these measures across educational systems may significantly shift student behavior and inspire responsibility and initiative. Institutions ought to utilize these strategies in order to hold successful interventions that result in meaningful change at the micro and macro levels. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Any questions for Juan? Megan.
So you mentioned the problem of climate change denial in your presentation, which, by the way, was very good. Congratulations. Why do you think this is such a prevalent problem?
Climate change denial has mainly been fostered through educational institutions that don't really prioritize facts and look at culture as a primary factor of thought and knowledge. So in parts of the country or really the world where climate change denial due to circumstances like an unwillingness to adapt to new energy sources due to economic reasons, for example, may prove as a difficult factor when trying to integrate the science and the facts, and teachers themselves are important. So if teachers are not convinced, then students won't be, and that'll lead to a culture of climate denial.
Thank you.
No problem.
And Sena.
Great presentation. I was wondering how you would ensure a smooth transition between the educational model that you described and our current system of education.
Definitely. So professional development for teachers is a really essential tool in transitioning from the current model to the new model, as this is where teachers again come as a recurring theme in ensuring successful intervention. So really educating them on strategies and making sure they're informed will allow for a smooth transition to a successful model.
Thank you. And sorry, Michael and Sarah, but we have to move on. But great job, Juan. Very impressive.